Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from Acas and the University of Westminster, where we have the pleasure of introducing a new training product for line managers, the Skilled Managers Conflict Management Skills Offer. My name is Terry Duffy, and I'm responsible for the training that Acas provides to individual managers and workplaces across Great Britain. I'm delighted to be joined today by Professor Richard Saundry, who is a key part of the research team and the architect of the new course that we're going to share with you today. This is a broadcast webinar where we'll hopefully answer all of your questions about our new training offer. Where we find ourselves today is the result of work carried out by leading experts in this field, including Professor Saundry, who joins us today, alongside other notable figures at the University of Westminster, such as Professor Peter Irwin, and also Professor Paul Luttrell from the University of Sheffield, of course, alongside ourselves at Acas, who provides support. The research behind this new product was focused on equipping managers to deal more effectively with conflict in the workplace and was tested on a large number of managers. The training interventions associated with the research were grounded in core skills and techniques. The intervention was also built as a low burden on managers in terms of the commitment of time and how they could access it remotely, but the results were still positive. And given the positive findings and feedback from managers and organisations throughout the research, ourselves at Acas and the University of Westminster have spent the last year preparing to offer this training more widely to organisations across Great Britain who have a need to upskill managers on conflict management. We launched the commercial offer on the 19th of September and are pleased to see that people are already taking up places. Before I hand over to Richard to talk you through the product in more detail, I wanted to turn to ask you all a couple of questions on the cost of conflict. So the first question is, what do you think the annual cost of conflict is to business in Great Britain? And the figure is quite a high one, 28.5 billion. So that's 28.5 billion of costs associated with things that are not probably contributing to the effectiveness or productivity of your workplaces. And when we think about the largest cost of conflict, it is related to resignation and or dismissal. So they're losses and exit from your business. In simple terms, this tells us conflict costs your organizations. And what I want to do now is to hand over to Richard to talk you through how some of these costs manifest themselves. And then he's going to introduce the new training offer that we believe can help to avoid and reduce these costs. So I'll hand over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Terry. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to have so many people on the call and to be with you to talk through some of the research we've been doing and also the training intervention, which you have the potential to take up. Terry's just been talking about the cost of conflict, and I posted in the chat a link to the report of some research that I did with another member of the Skilled Managers team, Professor Peter Irwin, a little while ago, which was the first piece of research that looked at the cost of workplace conflict to organisations. And as Terry said, the total cost to UK business is £28.5 billion. That's £1,000 for every business per year on average. So cost is a very significant impact, which sometimes goes under the radar. I'd like to also just break that down a little bit, because when we talk about the costs of resolving conflict at an early stage, we can see from the figures on the slide there that actually those are quite minimal. So that if a manager can resolve an issue just through a discussion with a member of staff, and that costs less than £100, we've calculated on average, simply due to the cost of managerial time. However, if that manager doesn't have the confidence or the skills to do that themselves, they perhaps have to get HR involved, and that adds an additional cost because obviously the HR practitioner has to come in. If you've got it in you've got an HR function in your organization, or it might be a more senior manager in the organization has to come in to assist and facilitate with that, more management time is lost. If that issue can't be resolved even then, and it escalates a little bit, or it's allowed to escalate, then the costs start to mount. So £1,500 on average for a workplace mediation. Nearly £1,000 if the individual brings a formal grievance, again, because of the management time involved in dealing with a formal complaint of that type. That's an average cost. So in some organizations, it's going to be much more than that, particularly in larger organizations. Quite often, we know from our research that individuals involved in conflict will take time off work because of the stress, anxiety, or depression involved with being involved in conflict at work. And we've calculated that on average, that costs not far off £8,000 per individual. So again, we can see the costs starting to become quite substantial. And crucially, as Terry said, the largest cost of conflict is if the employment relationship is completely broken. So if someone resigns or is dismissed. And the average cost, if somebody, after being involved in conflict, where the issue's been left to escalate, where it hasn't been managed very well, and therefore resigns and leaves the organisation, is more than 30 grand. And if that individual then goes on to bring an employment tribunal claim, you can add another £6,000 or not far off £6,000 to that. So we can see overall where conflict is poorly managed or where it's avoided and it's allowed to escalate, we are talking about very significant cost to the organisation. However, if it's nipped in the bud and if it's addressed early, those costs can be largely avoided, and crucially, the negative impacts on everybody involved can be minimised. So we would argue that resolving conflict early is a great business case for doing that. And that's really why we have developed the research we've been doing and this particular training course. So why are skill managers so important? Well, line managers shape experiences at work, more so perhaps than anybody else. They are the person who staff are more likely to turn to if they've got a problem. But also, if managers handle things badly, they're the person who is most likely to create and cause a conflict. So they're crucial, they're absolutely vital. And sometimes I think that's underestimated. In the UK, 1/3 of workers experience conflict of some type each year. That might be quite a minor conflict, or it might be something that's quite serious. But that's 1/3 of the entire workforce. So 1/3 of your staff will experience some form of conflict this year, on average. And 4 in 10 of those workers will reduce their effort and motivation as a result. Nearly 6 out of 10, so 56%, will suffer stress, anxiety, and/or depression as a consequence of that conflict. So it has real-world, real-time negative impacts on your staff, on their productivity, and therefore on your organisation. And when we started this research, we were trying to address a number of different problems. Firstly, is that still in the UK, we tend to recruit managers and we tend to promote people into managerial positions because they're really good at the day job. They're really good at the sort of technical operational aspects of their work. However, we don't necessarily recruit and promote managers because they're great at managing people. Therefore, they need to be trained. And unfortunately, we don't tend to do that very well in the UK. Part of the reason for that is because training is often squeezed out by operational pressures, because managers have got an awful lot to do, working in competitive and highly pressurized environments. They find it time to just carve out the space they need, both to train and also to engage in managing conflict, having the sort of conversations they need to with their staff. And unfortunately, conventional training, although it can be really high quality and very effective, so the sort of training that you might book where your managers go on a 1-day training course or a 2-day training course, a face-to-face training course, or a long-term managerial development program, which might be great, but it often doesn't reach the managers who really need it. sometimes because those managers might be resistant to going on that training in the first place, or they might not have time, or the organisation might find it difficult to finance that more extensive conventional training. So what we tried to do in this project is develop a training intervention which was really focused on addressing those problems and reaching those managers who otherwise might find it difficult to access that training. And it's really important to mention and reinforce the fact, as Terry mentioned right at the beginning of the webinar, that what we've come up with is the outcome of a 5-year research project funded by the government through the Economic Social Research Council, which is looking at building productivity in the workplace. So we have spent a long time talking to managers, talking to organisations, refining what we think they need, testing it, piloting it, and subjecting it to possibly the most rigorous evaluation that has been conducted on this type of training to date. And we'll talk a bit more about the findings from that a little later. But what is it? And you can see from the little video that we've got there, which is scrolling through, it gives you an idea of what the training looks like. Essentially, we've got 4 core modules, which are completed between 2 and 4 hours by the learners. And those core modules cover communication skills, so things like questioning and listening, where we try to give managers the skills they need to have really good quality conversations. It covers having poor conversations around poor performance, so difficult conversations. It covers decision making under difficult scenarios, giving managers the confidence to decide whether to address issues informally and address things early, or perhaps go down a more formal route. And we look at how managers can resolve more complex conflicts in their teams. Crucially, we've tried to make it really engaging. We use simulations, we use quizzes, we make it as flexible and accessible as possible. So it's smartphone compatible, or learners can access it on their laptops, or on their tablets. And certainly some of the organisations that we work with in the research, for example, in construction, where managers are accessing the training on a smartphone, on a building site during their working day, fitting it around their incredibly busy schedules. Just 2 points I'd like to also highlight about the training intervention, which we think are particularly important. Firstly, we provide learners with an analysis of their conflict management style. And so we do this right at the beginning of the training. The learners get immediate feedback in terms of what their conflict management style is before the training. And then we do it at the end, which gives learners an idea about the impact of the training, but also the areas they need to work on going forward. Crucially, the intervention includes 12 months access to an extensive toolkit, because one of the things that managers said to us was that quite often they go to a training course, they really enjoy it, they find it really stimulating, they then go back to work, and when they actually need to use those skills and those tips and those techniques, they don't have anything to refer back to. And so we've developed a searchable library of all the content in the course, supplemented with a wider range of materials, looking at a more extensive range of issues, including videos, advice, tips, downloadable planners, for example, so a manager can plan a performance conversation, which the managers can access over a 12-month period. So it's much more than just a linear course. The course is different because it's backed by that gold standard research. And again, I'm going to highlight some of the findings from the research in a second. And that's rarely done with this type of training. So we do know that this works. Secondly, within this training intervention, your managers can learn from some of the UK's leading experts. So a lot of the presentation of some of the material is done by myself, supplemented by the insights from some of Acas's leading experts. So we get the people who are the real experts in the field right in front of your managers, and they can learn from them on an ongoing basis. Crucially, they can learn anytime, anywhere to suit their schedule, and particularly using that toolkit to dip back in. And you can see from the little video again that's running through the presentation here, is how the toolkit is set up, looking at very specific common challenges that managers face on a day-to-day basis. One of the key things that we were trying to do with this is that we were trying to focus on the really the core practical skills that managers need. The feedback that we were getting from a lot of managers was that quite a lot of the training that they normally engage in is very interesting, but it can be quite theoretical. So we really stripped this back to what are the core techniques, tips, micro processes that managers can work through to give them confidence when they're really dealing with some really difficult, thorny issues. And that ability to refer back to materials to, for example, just bring up a 2-minute video to give you a tip on a difficult conversation before you're going to have that, we think is a really important part of this course, which helps to embed the learning really effectively. So who's this course for? Well, our research suggests that it's really effective with people who are new to management. So it is designed for people who have not managed before. It takes them from first principles and helps to build their confidence to intervene early and resolve issues in a more informal way. However, we have found from feedback to the course, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, that even with more experienced managers, the training does help to reinforce their existing knowledge and can get them to reflect a little bit on how they are managing things at the moment. So we would say that this course is valuable for managers at all different levels. And interestingly, one of the things that a lot of our managers said to us in feedback was that they wish that their managers were also getting access to this course, because it contains some really useful information and useful guidelines, advice, etc., no matter what level. But particularly, it is really focused on people who are new to management. And the learning outcomes are also outlined on the slide there. The cost of the course is £149.99. But I think the key thing to remember and reflect on is the potential cost of conflict that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. If managers don't have the skills to address issues early, then the potential cost to the organisation and those involved in the conflict can be really significant. So we'd argue that there's a really high rate of return to investing in managerial skills. And it's also important to remember that the cost of this course also involves that 12 months access to the toolkit. So it's not just a 2 to 4 hour online training course, it's much more than that. And the reason also why it's much more than that is, as I mentioned before, the development and the refining of this course has been based on sort of gold standard research methods. We tested this in the same way that a pharmaceutical organization might test a drug using a randomized controlled trial. We tested this in 62 different organizations, different sizes, different sectors. And this involved more than 8,000 managers and staff. We surveyed managers, and importantly, we surveyed the people who they managed. And we found some really positive impacts. Firstly, the training encouraged much more the sorts of managerial behaviours which were much more consistent with early and sustainable conflict resolution. So the managerial styles of those managers completing the course became much more collaborative and much less avoidant. There was also clear evidence that managers were intending to put this into practice. So in the micro and small organizations involved in the research, 8 out of 10 managers said that they intended to change the way they manage, which is really quite significant. And 4 out of 10 of those had already put the learning into practice by the time they'd finished the course. Crucially, and maybe this is the real key part of the research, is that improved managerial style and change in approach was felt by staff on the ground. And those people who were being managed reported that where their managers completed the training, they were more likely to address conflict quickly. crucial to minimizing the negative impacts of conflict at work. It's important to note that the impact was shaped by context. So we found that the training was particularly impactful in smaller organizations, perhaps because they're less likely to get that training in the first place. But also it worked particularly well where HR and the leadership of the organization were really committed and promoted the training, where the managers were really sure that they had the backing of the organization in building their skills and developing their confidence. And that's something certainly to bear in mind when developing your own training in your own organization. And we were really heartened by the feedback that we got from the managers who completed the training. The vast majority of managers who completed this training came back to us with some really positive comments about what they felt about the training. And in fact, the title of that slide is from one of our managers. So why isn't all our training like this? The crucial thing, I think, for new managers was that we use scenarios and simulations to take them through situations they might not have been involved in before, and they found that particularly useful, including the way in which the learning was interactive and engaging. But also, as shown on the slide there, and as I mentioned earlier, even existing managers found that they reinforced their knowledge and their expertise. And I think the last quote on that slide is particularly poignant, really, where a senior manager in the organization said, "I enjoyed participating in this course as it has made me reflect on my practice. I have been a manager for a number of years, and this course has made me realize that I have been stuck in my ways." So it made them really reflect and think about how they were managing their staff, and perhaps push them to just think about this in a little bit of a new light and change the way in which they manage their team. Okay, and I think it's time to go back to Terry.
Lovely, thank you for that, Richard. We've got a little time left in the webinar, and there's been some really some insightful and interesting questions being posed by attendees to the webinar. So I think I'm just going to go through a few of these, Richard.
Yeah,
sure. First thing, somebody was asking about the training platform being available in multiple languages. Now, I'm aware that, can I say, we've launched it recently, so I think the answer to that is it's just in English at the moment, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. What we have tried to do, and we have done a lot of work in trying to make the platform as accessible as possible. But yeah, at the moment it's just available in English.
And there's a couple of questions which are, I suppose, linked. There's one where there's people asking about is there an opportunity to have a preview of the course, so people can look at it a little bit more before deciding whether to purchase. And somebody who's asked about whether there's any free trial course available. And again, I suppose these are things that we could discuss with potential interested parties, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, well, there's two points to make. One is, I think if you're interested and want to know a little bit more, then we'd really encourage you to get in contact with us, and we'd be happy to talk you through that. And potentially, we can show you what the course looks like. However, if you go onto the course page where you on the booking page for the course, at the bottom of that, you can actually click a link, and that will take you through to a free demonstration version of the course. Now, to do that, you do have to set up an account on the learning platform, but that will give you access to a free demonstration of the course. You can look at some of the content in real time, and you'll have a number of days to be able to look at that and consider to see whether it's something you wish to investigate further. So if you go through to the University of Westminster booking page, at the bottom of the page, you can click on and set up an account, and you can get a free demo course, which will allow you also to work through, for example, a simulation and see how that feels. Having said that, if you've got further questions, you want to come back to have a discussion about it in a little bit more detail, feel free to get in contact.
Lovely, thanks for that, Richard. I'll take this next one, which is talking about, are there any courses or exams that managers need to complete with a certain time limit? Well, there's not really any examinations. It's a self-learning course, but within it, we've built ways that the learning can be reflected back to an individual. So there are quizzes and things that people can use to reinforce the learning, but there's not any exam somebody needs to pass at the end of the course. I think
If I
what
can
I'd
just add,
highlight. Sorry, yeah.
yeah, just to add to that, Terry, I did mention about the conflict management skills assessment that is done at the beginning and the end. And again, it's not an exam, but what it really neatly does is it provides the manager with an assessment of their conflict management style at the beginning, and then an assessment of their conflict management style at the end. So it's a nice deep developmental tool for the manager. And some of the organizations that we work with on the research, they really use this and actually had conversations with the managers about how they'd scored, about where their areas for future development were like. So they used the course as a stepping stone to really build further development for in the skills of the managers completing the course.
Lovely, yeah. And the thing that I would say as well is this course having the 12-month toolkit is the most important thing for me as well, because I think we've all been on training courses where it's made sense for the time that we were on
Yeah.
that course, or even for a short time afterwards. But the 12-month toolkit gives managers something that they can reinforce and embed learning that they've had. And I think that's sometimes far more important than passing it at the end of a particular module that you might have done where it all made sense. Being able to go back and reflect and access resources that you need to deal with those real situations in your workplace is a real powerful part of this product.
So sorry, just to add again to that, Terry, I can very quickly, and that is that it's something that the organisation can use as well to get their managers to reflect back onto the toolkit. So if the manager's saying, "Oh, I need a bit more advice in this area," then they can relate that back to the toolkit. And we have had organisations during the research who have actually used material from the toolkit to do further training with their managers.
Okay, just a couple of final ones just to run through. There's one where it's asking about, is the course inclusive, potentially applies to European businesses too. I think if that question is about, well, we've got people who are managing in a European context, the ways of managing conflict are universal. There are good approaches
Absolutely.
that are tried and tested, and the course underpins all best practice approaches in
Yeah.
that setting.
I
Um,
teach international managers in terms of these skills, and they're exactly the same skills in terms of having a conversation. What the course doesn't deal with specifically and on purpose, it doesn't really deal with the formal and legal aspects of some of these issues, which obviously would vary from country to country. It's all about getting managers to have good conversations with their teams and resolve conflicts at an early point.
Lovely, thank you, Richard. Just conscious of time, there are a couple more questions we've not been able to get through. I mean, there's one that I can quickly answer, which is enrolment ongoing? Yes, it is. It's open now. There's no set time limit for you to register by. The course is open and available for people to register, and I've put the link in the chat for everybody. There are a couple of ones around a technical one about people receiving the training as a SCORM package to host on their own learning management system, and we'll respond to that in the Q&A chat. And as I said, we will be sending out a recording of this with a copy of the slides. So thank you for your time, everybody. I hope you found this introduction to the Skilled Managers Conflict Management Skills offer useful and as excited as us about the possibility it can offer to give your managers the tools and skills they need to deal with conflict more effectively in your workplaces. We believe it will give managers those skills to not only deal with conflict as it emerges, but also the confidence to make early interventions to prevent it occurring and escalating in the first place. I put the link for those who are interested in signing up to the course into the chat. We'll be closing the webinar in a moment, but I just want to thank you for your time and your interest and your questions today, and I'll bid you all goodbye.